So my name is Raj Ratwani. I'm the scientific director for the National Center for Human Factors in Healthcare, which is part of MedStar Health. We're pretty new to the SHARPC program. We started our work in March of 2013. And many of you may be unfamiliar with MedStar Health. It's a 10-hospital system in the Washington, D.C. area. It includes Georgetown University Hospital, Washington Hospital Center. It's the largest system in the Mid-Atlantic region. And our center is unique. We're a mix of clinicians, human factors experts, safety scientists embedded in the clinical system. And there's tremendous advantages to doing that. Ben alluded to one earlier where we were able to facilitate the testing of twin list pretty rapidly and things like that. So it's quite unique. And I want to call out my team members who are here, Dr. Terry Fairbanks, who's sitting in the back, who's the director of our center, a human factors expert and emergency physician, and Dr. Zach Hedinger, who's an emergency physician and also has an informatics background. And they were instrumental in getting this work done that I'm going to describe today. So when we started our journey to, skip that slide. So when we started our health IT journey several years ago, I think everybody realized that safety and usability were going to be critical factors. But the question was how we actually get to that end goal, and what were each of the stakeholders in the space going to do to that end. So we knew that vendors would employ some kind of, hopefully, design process, but how rigorous that would be and what it would look like was a bit unclear. And it was unclear as to what the ONC was going to do in terms of certification and whether they were going to require some kind of usability or design process. And what we've done in this space as part of the SHARPC program is to focus on what vendors are actually doing. And so our central question was, can we inspect what vendors are doing, learn from it, understand their challenges, so that we can better shape the products that are coming out of this program and others to fit those specific needs. And I think Jacob Ryder from the ONC describes it best when he said, what we really want to do is do a usability analysis of the policy implications and regulations on vendors. And I think that's critically important, particularly as we look to how we can take our products here and move them forward to actually advance user-centered design. So what I'm going to talk about today is some of the work that we did, and I want to start with the classic definition that's referenced in the regulations and referenced by several folks when it comes to user-centered design and usability. And I think most people in this room are pretty familiar with this definition, that usability is the extent to which a product can be used by specified users to achieve specified goals with effectiveness, efficiency, satisfaction in a specified context. And there's this pretty diagram on the bottom that shows this iterative process. And when you read that and you look at this, it all seems quite simple. But I think, as we all know, it's rather complex. More complex than I think we realized in health IT, and we're working on it. Now, the way we think about usability, and I think this helps describe it a bit more, is we think about this as there being two bins to usability. So there's the user interface design components, and most of these problems have generally been solved in the human factors literature in the last 30 years. Things like, what colors should we use? How much scrolling should be done? What kind of screen design should actually be implemented? How many clicks and drags and so forth? It's important, but most of those problems have been solved. The second bin is really the complex stuff. This is the cognitive task support. This is the hard work that takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of resources. This is really understanding what clinicians are doing in their work environments, building the technology so it supports the work that they're doing, looking at functionality. Lots of people were talking about data visualization. This is the real meat of the problem and where I think we need to make tremendous investment, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that as I describe the work that we've done. So what our team did was we went and we visited 11 different vendors over 3 months. It was a significant amount of traveling, and my wife is still upset about it. And we tried to get a pretty diverse representation of vendors. And you can see some of the numbers here. Revenues ranging from $300,000 to over $1 billion, so very, very small vendors to the largest vendors. Employees from 10 to 6,000 plus. And we tried to also quantify the size of their usability or user experience team if they had one in place. That ranged from no dedicated team in place to over 30 employees. It was an interesting project. And when we went on each one of these visits, we spent roughly a day with each vendor. Each of the vendors was very welcoming. We talked to business analysts. We talked to product managers and usability folks when they were available. It was an absolutely incredible time, and I wish we had the opportunity to visit more. And on each one of those visits, I went on every single one, and then I was always accompanied by either Dr. Fairbanks or Dr. Hedinger to ensure that we had a clinical perspective, an informatics and human factors perspective as well. And I want to talk about what we discovered, because I think this is important to how we move forward with both policy but also the tools that we've developed. So what we're able to do is roughly break down these three vendors into three distinct groups. The first group is this group that we describe as having no true user-centered design process in place. And this group essentially is a bit confused. They think that user-centered design is really about satisfying customer requests or customer requirements. And they've actually developed pretty intricate infrastructures to support that. So they'll talk about web portals that they have, where each of their clients can describe features that they want on the next release, and they can have their clientele vote on those particular features, and then they address them. So they don't have a formalized user-centered design process in place, and I'll talk about some of the challenges and ways to move forward on this on the next slide. The second group, and this is one of my favorite groups because I think this is the group that's ripe for us actually facilitating their processes, is a group that has basic user-centered design processes in place. So this group understands that user-centered design is important. It's striving to implement those processes, but it simply doesn't quite have it well integrated into their complete design and development cycle. So they're still struggling with all of the constraints that come with being a developer in this marketplace and integrating these processes into that cycle. And the third group is that which has a well-developed user-centered design process in place, rigorous UCD processes. They've figured out how to make this work on the rigorous timelines that they're under and the resource constraints that they're operating under. They've developed efficient testing methods, including remote testing. And critically, they've developed this extensive infrastructure of being able to quickly get participants to be involved in every stage of their design and development. So they have these nice networks of their client base, and their clients really believe in their product. So when they develop a prototype or a wireframe or they want to conduct a formative test, they can do that very easily, and they have the participant base to do that. It might sound a bit silly, like that should be an easy thing to fill, but it's actually quite complicated. Now I want to talk about some of the specific challenges as we've moved forward with this. So for the No True UCD group, this is a really challenging group because they're still at that stage where they don't quite have management buy-in to usability. And part of that, I think, is driven by the marketplace for EHRs when we first started was a bit artificial. So usability wasn't quite a competitive point, but now as we see this marketplace opening up a bit, we see more ratings coming out. We're hearing from vendors in this room. I think that's changing, and I'm hoping that'll push this group a bit as we see that change. This group also has a bit of a knowledge gap, so we need to begin to push the UCD process a bit more and help them understand how they can very concretely implement some of the specific UCD processes. And finally, I think we have to help a bit with the prioritization piece. So this group is still focused on getting their product out the door, which they should. They're a business operating in this competitive market. But with that, we need to push how important usability is and, again, get that as a differentiating factor. Now, the second group is the basic UCD group. And we've heard a lot of great material from folks today about how they're developing products that can really feed this group. And so I'm hoping that we'll be able to disseminate that appropriately. So this group is very hungry for resources. Participant access is a very big deal to this group. They're not able to get to the clinicians that they need to run in their formative tests and summative testing and so forth. So if there's anything that we can do to push that and work with other stakeholders to do that, it's going to be critically important. And the other piece that this group is really lacking is the ability to have standard use cases to test their products. And we heard from Amy and other folks about how we can better feed that need. And that, again, might sound like something pretty simple, but if you're a small to mid-sized vendor and you've limited resources, having the expertise to develop these use cases can be quite complex. So anything that we can do to facilitate that process would be hugely beneficial. And the third group is the well-developed UCD group. And this group, even though they have well-developed processes in place, still could use a little bit of assistance. Specifically when developing workflow analyses for subspecialties, that takes, again, a pretty substantial investment. It's a lot of the bin 2 work that I was talking about. And to do that well, if we shared resources across vendors, which I believe some vendors are willing to do, we could facilitate that process pretty substantially. Also, this group is looking for better access to safety data. We're starting to see that with a recent announcement from Athena Health about how they've now collaborating with a PSO so they can get access to that data. But I think getting a safe harbor so that safety data can be shared with the vendors is going to be critically important for them improving their products. Now, the reason I think this is really important is, again, as we start thinking about where our products are going to go from this effort and other efforts, we can start targeting these specific groups. So instead of sort of thinking about how our products are broadly going to fit to one sort of demographic of vendors, we need to understand that there's a huge amount of diversity in this market, and each one of these vendors or groups of vendors have specific needs, and we need to tailor them to those specific needs. And I think it's also important to point out as we think about what's going to happen with 2015 certification is to understand that we want to be careful not to hinder the progress of that well-developed UCD group. And we're hearing that from some of the vendors, that perhaps the summative testing requirement is hindering their processes and that requirement may be at a point where it's too late in the development cycle for them to actually make changes. So as we think about what we're going to do in this space, we want to be careful and ensure that while we want to push the no true UCD group to employ great user-centered design processes, we don't want to hinder those that are doing it well. We want them to have the flexibility to dedicate usability processes and resources to the products that they want to. And I think one thing that was really clear, and we heard this from several groups today, was that there's clearly a shared responsibility for usability and safety. So obviously the vendors need to employ rigorous UCD processes, and we talked about how we can facilitate that. But in addition to that, providers need to think about their customization choices and need to support vendors in their efforts. Policy needs to fit into this entire landscape, and we need to ensure that policy is not, again, hindering vendors that are doing this well. And we heard from Ms. Townsend earlier about the patient story and how critically important the patients are to this whole picture, and ultimately the patients are the one that are going to be affected by poor health IT, and we need to understand their perspectives as well as we do this. So as we wrap up, I want to just close with talking about how bright we believe the future is. As we made all of those vendor visits, we were impressed by some of the growth that we've seen with many of these vendors. And as we see the adoption rates of EHRs grow significantly, we've also seen pretty significant investments in particular usability aspects from vendors. Two or three-fold increase in the size of usability teams for some particular vendors. And it's quite promising to see. In addition to that, we're seeing greater provider engagement in this entire landscape. So we're seeing better engagement with vendors, better engagement with other stakeholders, and improvements in the actual implementation piece. And finally, we're starting to see increased collaboration across the board with several stakeholder groups starting to talk to each other and sort of reduce the silos. So moving forward, we're very positive, and we look forward to any comments that folks may have. So thank you very much for your time.